The childhood home of Calvin Coolidge. He was the last president who seemed to really understand the role of government in the economy. Silent Cal was his nickname, and of course he knew that the government had no business being in the economy. Later presidents who claimed to know that still were stuck with the legacy brought on by Herbert Hoover and FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But here in Vermont, the childhood home of Calvin.
Okay, so if Calvin Coolidge was our last constitutional president, in my opinion, then we have to really look at the role of the federal government and FDR. So here we are at the Roosevelt Presidential Library. I'm at the Visitor Center. A lot of people are taught in school that the New Deal is what got us out of the Depression, when in fact the New Deal, there's a lot of evidence today that would suggest otherwise, that it was really the New Deal that kept us in the Depression. But let me explain a little bit more about the unconstitutionality of the New Deal. One of the first laws passed was the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933. And essentially that was, we're going to pay farmers to not produce, and we're going to pay farmers to destroy some of their livestock. Google 6 million pigs slaughtered if you want to know more. So what was the goal of that? Well, the goal of that was to restrict supply. When you restrict supply, what happens to the price? It goes up. So it was trying to benefit the farmers. Now that's pretty ironic in a case of a depression where there's a lot of homeless people, where there's a lot of people out of work, where there are a lot of people didn't have any money, couldn't pay for their own food. How do you destroy all that food? How do you stop growing it? But that's another story, because what happened really in terms of the constitutionality of it was the Supreme Court said, you're taxing food processors and turning around giving that money to farmers. That's redistribution of wealth. You're just taking from one and giving to another, and that's not constitutional. So they struck that one down. Now, the second Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1938, the other thing too, they said the agriculture is not in the domain of the federal government. It's not in the purview. You got to talk about the Constitution first. If you don't know all about the Constitution, well, we'll talk a little bit about it, but to do that, we're going to first go to Washington.
In many respects, Article 10 of the U.S. Constitution is the most important, because that one clearly states that the powers not enumerated to the federal government are reserved for the states or for the people. It's pretty awesome. It says your powers, federal government, are limited and finite, not unlimited. You can't do everything. Some things, if we didn't specifically give you those powers, those rights, then you do not have them. What does that mean? Well, for instance, there's history of presidents vetoing bills that they said we can't find a reason in the Constitution to aid foreign countries. Can you believe that? All this aid that we give to all these other countries, it's really unconstitutional. But it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It means that it's against the Constitution, though, and we still have to recognize that. The federal government has overstepped its powers in so many ways, and just because a law is passed, just because 51% of the congressmen or senators approve of the law, that doesn't make it a constitutional law. The powers not enumerated to the federal government are reserved for the states or for the people. Pretty scary thought when you realize all the things that we do. Education, where's that in the U.S. Constitution? It's not. It's reserved for the states, for the people to decide. It is not a federal government issue. The U.S. Supreme Court's the final arbiter on all things legal and constitutional. That's his make Mo's right. I guess the most famous case of being wrong is Dred Scott. But there are a lot of other cases here. The Supreme Court has not been the apolitical arm of the government that it was hoped to be. Unfortunately, a lot of the decisions are 5-4, barely passing one direction or the other.
So back here at Hyde Park, New York, Presidential Library of Franklin Roosevelt, what you need to understand is they Roosevelt was very concerned about some of his programs, so he decided he wanted to pack the court. What happened was he couldn't get 5 out of 9 votes for some of his programs, so he decided we should increase the number of Supreme Court justices to 15 rather than to keep it at 9, which is what it had been since George Washington's day. Now, that eventually did lose. He didn't get his way on that one. However, he did get one person to retire and was replaced by one of his justices, as well as another guy, for reasons that are not very clear, a guy named Owen Roberts. He changed a lot of his votes. There's some question about whether or not there was political pressure there. The presumption is there was, because he had voted against things like the minimum wage laws in previous court rulings, and then suddenly was in favor of them. So anyway, another one of Roosevelt's laws was the National Industrial Recovery Act. This one, you really have to learn more about it because it's phenomenal in scope. The idea that business and labor and government was going to work together sounds wonderful, but in reality, they were going to set fair prices. They were going to set fair labor laws, hours worked, and so on. But how do we define what's fair and what's not? And for one industry and for one person, those rules are very different. In the free market, there's a lot more choice and personal responsibility that you take. But here now, he was looking at the federal government as being able to step in and determine what's fair and what production should be. Very controversial, but in the 1930s, Roosevelt was also living the era of Mussolini in Italy, and Stalin in Russia, the Soviet Union, and Hitler in Germany, where governments were starting to take control of the economies of those nations as they ramped up toward war. So what Roosevelt was doing was really just an American version of that, some of that stuff. So the Supreme Court really, it was a huge battle between Roosevelt and the Supreme Court trying to figure out where the power resides. Roosevelt was very concerned because the Supreme Court that he was given upon taking the oath of office in 1933 was not a Supreme Court friendly to his ideas.